A Barnstormer in Oz by Philip Jose Farmer is an unsanctioned sequel to L. Frank Baum's Wonderful Wizard of Oz. If you've heard of Farmer's Walt Newton universe, this sort of follows the rules of that, where books about Sherlock Holmes, Doc Savage, and Tarzan are actually embellished accounts of real-life dudes. This supposes Dorothy visited Oz in 1890. L. Frank Baum interviewed her and changed the details in his book. As, according to Farmer, Dorothy only visited Oz once, Baum invented everything in his sequels. This book follows Dorothy's son Hank, a pilot who accidentally gets transported to Oz and helps Glinda the Good deal with an invasion from a new Wicked Witch and the United States government attempting to invade. If that sounds interesting, I've got some bad news. I don't hate this as much as I hate Wicked, but this book's biggest sin is it's boring. Farmer is more interested in exploring this world than he is the war on two fronts. I should have seen this coming based on how little story there is in his first two Walt Newton entries. If you're interested in Glinda's attempt to protect her people, you can just read the last 40 pages. Everything else is mostly a waste of time. Hank arrives in Oz, is quarantined for about a month because Glinda fears he might carry disease. She asks him to bring the Tin Man and a Scarecrow to her, only to immediately take them back to their respective kingdoms. Probably so Farmer, via Hank, can ramble for a chapter about how the Tin Man's origin, as told to Dorothy, makes no realistic sense. So he must have lied to Dorothy about how he became a Tin Man. He did this some in the Walt Newton stuff, but it's really bizarre for him to draw certain lines in the sand with Oz. You know, a fantasy kingdom. Lots of people describe this as Farmer tackling the world of Oz through a sci-fi lens, except he doesn't go very far with that notion. There's still plenty of what Dorothy and Baum describe as magic that Hank tries to rationalize with a scientific mind, but he can't come to any rational conclusions. Why bother half-butting the defantasization if you're going to leave plenty of magic in there? We get indescribable horror monsters that exist between dimensions, an ancient civilization called the Longons, which feels more like H.P. Lovecraft than sci-fi, but he doesn't go far in that direction either. Hank and friends explore ancient ruins and speculate on the origins of this lost race, which has nothing to do with the story at hand. Farmer wanted Hank to meet Oscar Diggs, who, according to Farmer, never escaped Oz, but he didn't feel like he had room for it in the story. I don't get why he thinks he didn't have room for that, but he had time for all the nonsense he did include. Since his earliest Walt Newton entries weren't stories, but detailed study guides to the bibliographies of these characters, he could have done something similar with Oz. I wouldn't have been interested in that, but if that's where his passion lies, why not? He could have followed up The Real Oz You Don't Know About with Hank Stover coming to Oz, where we would get an actual story. Much like once he got the tedious world building out of his head in his Tarzan and Doc Savage books, he moved on to an actual story with The Other Log of Phileas Fogg. You have world building disease, where an author gets caught up in the world building and forgets to write a story. Farmer may be one of the only authors to sell his world building disease, and props to him. If I could do it, I would too. But from this side of the cash register, that part of the story isn't very interesting. But I'm certain I'm in a minority with how popular he remains with readers today. I think this would have been better if Farmer handed it off to someone else. He came up with some solid ideas, some I wasn't wild about, but we're left with an interesting premise he got tangled up in, with less than a fourth of the book devoted to actual story. I can almost imagine Farmer feeling exhausted once he's explored his world building because now he has to wrap up the narrative. If you remember plot structure from middle school, there's this thing called falling action and resolution. Well, not with Philip Jose Farmer. This turd ends less than a page after Glinda defeats the Red Witch, with Hank mumbling how she's a good witch. Okay, maybe I should end my video in an equally unsatisfying